Okay. So let's start because the class is called Principles of Health and Fitness. One of the things that I think is really important for us to begin with is just very, very simply to define what that means. What does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to be fit? And kind of what's the context that's going to go on and surround all of that stuff, okay? So one of the best definitions for what it means to be healthy is going to come from kind of about 1950 from the World Health Organization, which is a group that has maybe not covered themselves with all of the best amount of glory as part of the pandemic, but they were doing the best that they could. So health in many ways can be defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, okay? It's not merely the absence of disease or infirmary, okay? To be healthy, you have to kind of have good physical health or good physical ability. You have to have good, positive mental kind of state of mind. You need to have healthy social relationships and those kinds of things, or positive social relationships. So to be fully healthy, it doesn't just mean I don't have the flu, or I don't have cardiovascular disease, or I don't have COVID or something like that, okay? And I think that's really important to remember. It's this multi-dimensional type of thing. And the other piece of this that I think maybe we don't always contextualize in the best possible way is that health exists as a continuum, okay? As a continuum. Positive on one side, negative on the other side. And if I tell you guys that if I ask, say, I don't know, Wyatt's at the top of my things, if I just said, Wyatt, here, what's going to happen is, from a physical health standpoint, but somewhere between fully best positive and like the worst, like the negative, where are you falling on that line? Okay. And you can tell me kind of where you are. And then we do the same thing with mental and the same thing with social. And we can get you guys to give us some idea. Like maybe I'm doing really well physically, but I'm not doing as well mentally, right? People have depression or anxiety or something from that standpoint. Or maybe I'm doing good physically, I'm doing good mentally, but especially as part of the pandemic or something, socially, I'm not kind of where I would like for everything to be. I've been isolated. I haven't seen my family. I haven't been able to see some of my friends, whatever that's going to be. Okay. So it's a continuum. All of us, okay, can have our idea of where we are from a health standpoint. It can change at almost any moment every day. And each one of those things is like a sliding little scale of everything that this can change as we move around. Okay. So one of the things that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in class is something called a morbidity, okay? A morbidity. And so a morbidity is anything, physical, mental, social, okay? It's anything that moves us from this idea of positive physical, mental, or social health and well-being and pushes us towards negative on that particular standpoint, okay? As long as it is doing that, as long as it doesn't kill us, we call that a comorbidity. So having COVID, a comorbidity. You guys will learn in class, being obese is a comorbidity. Not getting enough exercise or physical activity is a comorbidity or a morbidity. If you have more than one morbidity present at any time, we call them comorbidities. So lots of people will have, I have high blood pressure and I have obesity and I have impaired fasting glucose, so that I'm probably going to be a type 2 diabetic. You have this cluster of these things that we call comorbidities. And so all of them are working together in concert to push our health more into a negative direction. Okay. And so what we're going to hope to learn in class is what are some of these things that are morbidities that will make our health less than ideal. But then we're also going to learn, I hope, on what are some of the behavioral, we're going to see that exercise and physical activity is a behavior. What are some of the behavioral, but then also physiological things that are going to be going on as we become more active, as we exercise more, that are going to counteract some of these comorbidities and actually push us from negative to a more positive type of health. Okay. So when we look at comorbidities, and this is maybe something that you guys have had some exposure to over the last 18 months or so. If we look at like the idea that there's something called epidemiology, which is a way of studying the presence of certain things in the population, especially as it relates to health and well-being and those things. And so we talk about, right, from a health perspective, we will talk about the number of people that have a certain morbidity. Okay. And we express it as the number of persons who are ill or who have that characteristic per unit of population per year. And so this would be something that we would call this the prevalence, okay, of this. So the prevalence of having high blood pressure is, and it's usually expressed per 100,000 people in the population to try to keep the numbers reasonable. But, the prevalence of high blood pressure is 1,220 people per 100,000 of the US population have high blood pressure, right? And so that works out to some percentage of the population. 10% of the population has high blood pressure. It's actually more than that, but that would be a thing like that. Or, right, 25% of the population is obese because they have a BMI greater than 30. And so we can express our morbidities in that way. And what we want to look at then is, as the morbidities go up, what are going to be the kind of associated them with this negative health outcomes, like days spent in the hospital or healthcare cost or some things like that. Okay. Does that generally make sense to you guys? The idea that this is, health is not just, am I sick or not? It is a much more complex thing than that. And anything that you have going on, okay, that's going to push you out of that kind of perfect positive health is this thing that we call a morbidity. We're going to spend a huge amount of time in class talking about morbidities and how morbidities alter physiology and kind of the pathophysiology of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and arthritis and cancer and those things, and then how exercise or activity can counteract some of those things, how exercise changes the structure of the heart. It changes the number of blood vessels that you have, and how that impacts and can lower your blood pressure or can lower your risk of having congestive heart failure or something like that. How exercise changes the way the body, the amount of insulin the body releases, how it changes the way insulin interacts with its receptor, and how we take glucose up out of the that we've eaten out of the bloodstream and into our muscle cells and other tissues. How we can then use exercise as a way to counteract the morbidity and pathophysiology of, say, type 2 diabetes. And so we'll get a lot into that on the back half of class. The first half of class is much more so going to be, let's learn about the physiology. Let's learn about what normal function looks like. And then during exercise, and then we'll apply a little bit of that kind of later on. Okay. All right. So people that have morbidities that last for a long time, okay, you have the flu or you have COVID, although we don't really know what's going to happen with COVID long term, but you have the flu, you get sick, your immune system fights off the virus, and then you get better, and you therefore no longer have that particular morbidity. Okay. Well, there are some that are going to be diseases or things that are going to last over a much longer period of time. And we call those types of morbidities chronic diseases. Okay. Chronic diseases, things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, things of that nature. These are the most serious public health burdens in the world today. Okay. So people that go to the doctor, the vast majority of them, especially once they get to be kind of middle to kind of older age, they're going to the doctor because they have something wrong that's going to be caused by cardiovascular disease, or they have some form of cancer, or they're a type 2 diabetic. Okay, they have things that they seek out doctors' visits because of their chronic diseases. And so this is going to be a real problem because it costs money, it takes time, and it's one of the things that leads to death So about 60% of deaths worldwide are going to be due to chronic diseases, especially in what we would think of as industrialized Western nations. Okay, so the US, most of Western Europe, Russia, those places, a few places in some of the kind of larger places in Africa, but then in Brazil and Mexico and a lot of the South American countries that are a little more developed, about the vast majority of deaths, especially in adults, are from chronic diseases. And so these are the things that are killing people. And they're only going to be on the rise as we bring McDonald's to more of the world, as we bring desk jobs to more of the world, then chronic diseases are going to go up. And we'll kind of talk about the history of those things a little bit tomorrow. Okay. So the most common kind of diseases or chronic diseases in the US, you can see that almost 60% of adults in the US have high blood pressure. Okay. About 30% of adults at some point will have depression. You can see arthritis, osteoporosis. About 20% of the population has either type 1 or type 2 diabetes right now. That number is growing rapidly. Okay. And so they're very, very common. There are going to be people in your life right now that have some of these chronic diseases, and there may be things that we can do about that, okay, by changing their eating and exercising habits right now. Okay. Unfortunately, at times there will be things that we will do in class. We're going to have to talk about mortality. We're going to talk about what's called mortality rate or the death rate, the number of people that die from a certain condition relative to the population size over a period of time. And that's usually the number of people that die per 100,000 people per year from a given condition. Okay. And so we will look at two different types of mortality rates. One is called all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality is just all deaths lumped together. Okay. So this year in the US, a certain number of people died. Okay. And so we know the number of people that have died. We know the total number of people in the US. We can calculate the percentage of people in a year that have passed away. Okay. Or we can do it condition specific. So we can say the number of people in the US that died specifically from diabetes. Okay. So we can get a mortality rate for diabetes. We can get a mortality rate for certain kinds of cancer or for congestive heart failure or for car accidents or smoking related things like that. Okay. It can be very, very condition specific. And we can then compare either all cause or condition specific mortality rates among people that have different BMIs and different weights, or among people that are more active or less active, or people that resistance train and don't resistance train, or that run versus bike or something like that. We have lots and lots of data. If the stuff interests you, you can go to the Center for Disease Control's webpage and you can get like all the way down to these maps, all the way down to the level of the county across the US for kind of disease specific prevalence and mortality rates and healthcare costs and obesity rates and things for pretty much every county in the US. So some really interesting data if that stuff is appealing to you guys. Okay, so I'm going to do this because I'm going to try to illustrate a point. Okay, so if we look, and these are data that are about 10 years old, but the percentages are not particularly different now. These are the leading causes of death in the US. Okay, and so here's men, here's women, and this is in adults. Okay, you guys will note that about 25% of deaths are caused by heart disease. Another 25% are caused by cancer. I would argue that strokes are a form of heart disease. They should get lumped in here, but here's strokes, diabetes, Alzheimer's, kidney disease, obviously suicide, unintentional injuries, gunshot wounds, car accidents, things like that. And you've got flu, pneumonia, these kinds of things. We looked at this for this past year. We could do a specific thing for COVID if we wanted to. Men, women, okay. You guys will note that unintentional injuries tend to be lower in women than men. Guys are always the ones driving their motorcycles or driving their cars too fast and doing things that are a little bit crazier. And that way they tend to have higher rates of unintentional injuries. But what I want you to focus on are these two kind of blue ones, at about 50%. And then if we add in maybe stroke and diabetes and these kinds of things, so almost 60% of of deaths in adults are due to things that are chronic diseases that being more physically active, exercising more, which is going to cause us to be more fit, can have positive outcomes on. Okay. And so we'll look a little bit tomorrow at how kind of these leading causes of death have shifted over time. We can look back to like 1900, and you will note that like cancer and cardiovascular disease were not nearly as large a portion of the death rate as they are today. And there's various reasons for that, but one of them is that we are sedentary. We don't exercise and we don't do as much physical activity as we used to. And so I show this because I think it gives us hope. I want to give people kind of a positive feeling that if roughly 60% of the deaths that occur every year are due to things that can be positively impacted by just going for a walk every day, then I think that there's good in all of that. There's hope that we can combat some of this, and and try to institute some behavioral changes, right? I mean, almost everybody could find, could you find 20 minutes to go for a walk today? Right? Like go, take your dog for a walk or go walk with your partner or a friend or your parents or something, right? Like just get out and do something. Maybe not in the middle of the day when it's 100, but it's not that difficult to do these kinds of things. And I think there's some really kind of heartening and things kind of going forward with all of that. But we're going to spend a lot of time in class not just saying, hey, this is good for us, but trying to understand kind of why. What does exercise do? How does it change physiology and those kinds of things? Okay. So here we have deaths by age. It's kind of the same thing. Here's the range that you guys would be in. So it's basically people that are 1 to about 25 years old. You guys will note that like homicide, suicide, and unintentional injuries are the leading causes of death in kind of relatively young to kind of college age folks, to kind of very young adults. Heart disease, cancer, only about 10%. You get into my age range, I'm just barely nipping into this age range, still unintentional injuries, right? But you will note that cardiovascular disease and cancer and diabetes and things are going to begin to rise. And then you get over 45 and it looks very much like kind of the overall adult kind of thing where these things are going to be that way. Okay. And so what we can glean from all of this very simply is that things like heart disease, things like cancer take time to develop. Okay, they take time. And we'll get into the hows and the whys of all of that. But you don't see cancer a lot in kids. And there's some good reasons for that. And then there's some bad reasons that when we do see it in kids, it can oftentimes be really, really bad. You don't see cardiovascular disease in kids. You don't see cardiovascular disease in folks that are y'all's age, even my age, very often, because it's a disease that takes a long period of time to develop. And so that's also good because it means we have a large window of time to be able to change our diet, change our exercise behaviors, change our physical activity behaviors, and potentially reduce the risk of these kinds of things that are going to begin to develop. Okay. That's not to say that you guys should just eat whatever you want and never exercise and do things now, because those things aren't really big issues for you, even though they're not. We have lots of evidence that people that are even y'all's age and younger, that if you are more active and you're more fit at y'all's age, that there's a lot of kind of positive benefits and outcomes to all of that. Here's some more data. These are death rates by state. And we're going to look at some things on the map. And I show this because here we are. Here's Oklahoma. Okay. Lots of folks are probably from Texas. If you're not from Oklahoma, you're from Texas. And then here, I'm from Arkansas, and I've spent time in Mississippi. I've spent time in Georgia. So the darker the blue here, the higher the overall death rate. Okay. So not great. And what you will note on this pattern, where we've got more blue and darker things kind of here in the south central to southeast US, things being better in the northeast, things being better out west, especially like in kind of Colorado and these mountain areas and those kinds of things. This is a recurring theme. Okay. This is death rate. If I put rates of getting enough physical activity, it's going to look the opposite of all of this. People are more sedentary in these places where there's higher death rates. People have higher weights. They're more obese in these kinds of places. And there's some sociological and some physiological reasons that are kind of going to all interact together to kind of lead us to looking this way. But again, I show this, and I will try to do this with everything we do in class. I'm trying to set some context for you guys about why you should give a shit. Okay. One, these diseases are going to affect you and people that you care about. And two, right, we, for better or worse, live right now, and many of you are from and will likely go back to and live in places where these things are more prevalent. It's a higher incident of these things happening in Oklahoma than in a lot of other places. Okay. So there's a greater chance that if you have a job, you're going to come into contact with people that have these problems, or you're going to have people that are going to come into your clinic that are going to have these particular problems and those kinds of things at a much higher rate. And so it is in some ways our responsibility to try to do something about all of this if we can. Although I'm not sure that COVID has taught us a lot of things, that changing behaviors and stuff, there's a lot more that goes into changing behavior than just saying like, hey, this thing's going to work, right? We should do this or we should do that. But I just want to provide some context for all of this. Okay. Nia, do you have a question or yes? Fire away, please. Uh-oh, I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear Nia? You're not on mute, but I'm having a hard time hearing you.
There,
I got you that time.
I said, do you think the death rate is like more prevalent in the South because of, maybe the way that they eat, like certain things they eat, things like
Yes.
that? Okay.
Mm-hmm. We like to fry everything in the South. So my wife tells me that I'm not a I self-identify now that we live in Oklahoma much more as a Southerner than I ever did when we lived in Arkansas or Mississippi or Georgia. Anyone who thinks that Oklahoma is really in the South, I will just tell you that I think you are mistaken. We're south of Kansas or south of Nebraska. But it's really not, either culturally or in some other ways, I feel like very much kind of the South. You guys put like Chipotle stuff in your gravy here, and that's not how we do it.
I would agree with that. I'm even from Oklahoma, and I still feel like we're not the South at all, because I've been to those states. That's like the real South.
Yeah.
Like the real South. And and there's kind of like everywhere, right? Like there's good and bad parts of sort of what we would call maybe Southern culture and those kinds of things. And we got to try to take the good and do what we can to be better about the bad on all of those kinds of things. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There are, and we can look at some things like death rates also track well with poverty rates, with socioeconomic status. And so in general, the South tends to be a little bit more rural and have more people that live below the poverty line and of lower socioeconomic status. They have fewer people that have college degrees, which also tracks with SES. But also, yes, fried food, right? The kind of use of food as part of family and culture and those things, as kind of part of communing, either in you're going to church and you're having potluck, or you have everybody comes over, for family things, these things that are good in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of food, right? Like you better eat something. And what it is that we eat is, heavy cream, lots of butter, it's not a lot of salads that are always kind of there. And so, yeah. And so I think some of that very much is related to some of those kinds of things, but it's really, really complicated. And
it's also the culture of like, take a plate home kind of thing. And then you're eating late at night and things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I think there's a lot that kind of goes into those things. And if anybody cares, when I taught chronic disease class, which we don't even offer it anymore. I tried to get them to let me offer it this summer. But we would do a thing where there's some papers where they've tried to statistically control for like everything possible and try to pull out some of those individual kinds of things. And there's some really fascinating stuff that goes into a lot of that. Plus it's hot, and people stay inside more. So they may be less active because it's like hot in the summer. You don't want to go out and exercise.
Yeah.
Stuff is not built, right? Anybody that's ever been to, like, have you ever been to Colorado where there are hiking trails, or you've been to, like in Boulder, Colorado, they literally have like a bike highway and you can ride your bike like everywhere. I'm telling you, you try to ride your bike here around downtown Oklahoma City, you're going to get hit by a car. And those kinds of things. And so we're not set up to walk or bike in things in the South in the same kind of way that they are in places in the Northeast, you know, and those kinds of things. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a very complicated question, but you're certainly barking up the right tree, Nia.
I was going to add something. I'm actually from Colorado. And so what's interesting is that for my family, there is some stuff from the South that like leaches into this part of the Midwest. And so like the first thing that my mom mentioned when we like went to Walmart to do some grocery shopping, she was like, people are a lot nicer here. Like they'll just say hi to you. And in Denver, that like doesn't happen. So there's some bits that I think like leach into this part from the South, but I would agree it's not like the South.
Right. No, I when we first moved here from Mississippi, I was like, people aren't very nice on the phone. Like we were trying to call to get our utilities set up, and I was used to some other kind of different things that were going on. So, okay.
Actually, sorry, I don't want to like cut in here, but I actually moved to Portland, Oregon about a year ago, and the culture is like completely different out there. Like every weekend you go hiking and like everybody's always walking, and I think that contributes as well.
No, it 100% does. Absolutely it does. And it's hard to, that's for you guys want to know, like, why do you have to take the health promotion classes, right, as part of your major? You guys are going to learn about theories of behavior change and why it's so hard to get people that have grown up doing one thing to change and do something else. And then why, like, oh, well, I've moved to Portland or I've gone to someplace and the built environment is different, but also there's some level of, I wouldn't necessarily call it peer pressure, but like, this is just what people are doing, right? And so if I want to go out and do things, then I guess we're going to go for a hike, or we're going to go ride our bikes or whatever else. It's just different, and it's hard to change behaviors. So excellent. I appreciate you guys sharing those kinds of things. You know what? Let me do this one thing, and then we'll go ahead and we'll call it off today. This will be a kind of reasonable place. So what you guys see here in front of you is mortality rate due to cardiovascular disease. And if you were to look at all-cause mortality, it's going to track very similarly, but it's broken down by something called BMI, or the body mass index. And the body mass index is really not a very good measure, except that it predicts death rates really, really well. Body mass index is how much you weigh divided by how tall you are squared. And so it's a way to try to estimate not exactly your body volume, but kind of how much space are you occupying in the world. And so there are some very specific cutoff points for BMI. And it's not done very well in this particular slide, but 25, you're at a body mass index of 25, you are considered to be overweight. At a body mass index of 30, you are considered to be obese. And so anything from about 18 to 25 is considered quote unquote normal, whatever that means. If you're under 18, you're underweight. But if you look at cardiovascular disease death rates, then what you've got is some kind of amount, I don't want to call it normal, but some kind of relatively stable amount that kind of holds across this range of normal BMIs. And then as you tick into overweight, we begin to kind of linearly increase. And then as you get into obese and then morbidly obese, you're going to see this increase, kind of exponential increase in death rates from cardiovascular disease. And so what we know is that for most people, and we'll talk about this when we do body comp, we'll talk about the ins and outs of BMI, but for most people, if you weigh more, okay, it's not because of muscle. It's not because of extra bone mineral density. Most people, if they're weighing more, if they're gaining weight, they are mostly gaining adipose tissue. They're gaining subcutaneous fat. They're gaining fat in and around their organs and those kinds of things. And we know that having extra adipose tissue that drives up your BMI, that having that adipose tissue has lots of negative health consequences. Okay. It's very, very predictive. Having excess fat is predictive of developing high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, peripheral arterial disease, things that are going to be problems from a cardiovascular standpoint. It's also very, very, even more so highly related to the development of type 2 diabetes, which is getting to be a really, really big problem. Okay. So, and we will talk about then in the context of obesity and BMI rates, what happens if I'm overweight or I'm obese, but I'm also very, very active? What is going to happen? What am I going to look like? Can we counteract some of this stuff independent of changing sort of your body size? And the answer is absolutely we can. And we'll get into kind of the hows and whys of that. Okay. So I think this is as good a place as any for us to call a stop for today. Okay. We'll pick up tomorrow talking about what it means, like what is physical fitness and how is fitness different than health, and how fitness is more of a exercise related parameter in some ways than kind of overall health. We'll get into some of the ins and outs of that. Okay. On Canvas, there is a thing that says like assignment 1, info sheet. What I want everyone to do tomorrow, okay, for tomorrow, is I want you to download that sheet and I want you to fill it out for me and I want you to email it to me. Okay. I'm not going to make a Dropbox to turn it in on Canvas. Just shoot it to me in an email. But it's going to say things like, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you hope to get out of class? How do you learn best? Tell me something unique about yourself. And then it's going to ask about like some bro science questions that you're interested in. Okay. Also, what I want for tomorrow for, let me stop sharing, for brunch with Dr. Black, let me get on Canvas. Let me look at people. I would like, it's going to be basically like A through D or thereabout. Let me look. People, let me count here. So I would like Sunny, Gavin, Jessica, Kenneth, and Gabrielle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do that. Okay. If you guys would be, if you would like to come for brunch with Dr. Black, you guys are going to be up tomorrow and we can chat a little bit. I'll try to learn a few things about yourself and I'll put that in. I'll sort of copy out everybody's names and I'll put that in an announcement this afternoon so that you can see. So you guys come at 10:30 tomorrow. I'll get a new Zoom link. Everybody else, 10:45, and we'll start talking about physical fitness. Okay. All right. So I'm going to